How do we know that Jesus said the things the Gospels say he did? A commenter on my YouTube channel asked me this question in response to my last video where I addressed the Alexandrian versus Antioch schools and the related manuscript traditions. He asked, how do you know that Jesus said the things the Gospels say he did? Well, that is an excellent question, and I am more than happy to answer it. And I want to offer 7 reasons why we may know that Jesus said the things that the New Testament and especially the Gospels say he did. Number 1, manuscript evidence. In the words of Dr. Daniel Wallace, we have an embarrassment of riches when it comes to the New Testament manuscripts. When we look at ancient Greek works, we look at Homer's Iliad, and we see that we have around 1,800 copies. Herodotus' histories, we have approximately 100. Plato's works, around 210. Caesar's Gallic Wars, around 250. And Tacitus' Annals, only around 20. But when it comes to New Testament Greek manuscripts, we have around 5,800. There are also some fantastic books that speak to the manuscript evidence. There's The New Testament Documents, Are They Reliable? By F.F. Bruce. And this classic work provides a detailed comparison of New Testament manuscripts with other ancient texts. Then there's Evidence That Demands a Verdict by Josh McDowell. This book includes charts and discussions about the manuscript evidence for the New Testament. Then there is The Text of the New Testament, Its Transmission, Corruption, and Restoration by Bruce Metzger and Bart Ehrman. Now, this scholarly work offers detailed information on the manuscript tradition of the New Testament, and I specifically want to draw your attention to Ehrman. Even though he is an agnostic and is highly critical of the traditional claims about Jesus, he affirms the historical existence of Jesus of Nazareth. Ehrman's 2012 book, Did Jesus Exist? The Historical Argument for Jesus of Nazareth, presents historical evidence and scholarly arguments to support the view that Jesus was a real historical figure. He also argues against the mythicist position that claims Jesus never existed. Ehrman, who is no Christian, affirms that the historical Jesus lived in first century Judea and was a Jewish rabbi. Number 2, early sources. If we go back to the works that I mentioned earlier, you'll see that our earliest copies of those ancient Greek writings are significantly distant from the autographs for everything except the Greek New Testament. When we look at those ancient works, Homer's Iliad was written somewhere around 800 BC, and our earliest copies are from around 400 years later. And Herodotus' Histories was written somewhere around 480 to 425 BC, and our earliest copies are from 900 AD, 1,300 years after it. Plato, we have his works from around 400 BC, and yet our earliest copies are from around 900 AD, again, around 1,300 years. Caesar's Gallic Wars were written somewhere between 100 and 44 BC, and yet our earliest copies are from 900 AD, approximately 1,000 years later. Tacitus' Annals were written around 100 AD, and our earliest copy is from 1100 AD, 1,000 years later. But when it comes to the New Testament, which was written around 50 to 100 AD, we have copies that go back to around even maybe before 130 AD. But if we dive into these early sources, we can clearly see that the very early manuscript evidence for large portions of the New Testament. For example, we have Ryland's Library Papyrus P52, which dates back to 125 to 150 AD. Now, that content is a small fragment of the Gospel of John, and it's considered the earliest known fragment of the New Testament. But P46, dated 175 to 225, contains several parts of several of Paul's letters, including Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and 1st Thessalonians. Then we have P66, dated to around 150 to 200 AD. And it's one of the earliest and most complete manuscripts of the Gospel of John. P75, dated to around 175 to 225 AD, contains substantial portions of the Gospels of Luke and John. And then we have P45, dated to around 250 AD, that contains portions of the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and Acts. Number 3, multiple witnesses. We have multiple sources for the words of Jesus. And having multiple sources is extremely beneficial in historical and textual studies, including the analysis of ancient documents like the New Testament. It offers several key benefits. 1. Cross-verification. Having multiple authors attest to the same events, sayings, and facts increases the likelihood that they are historically reliable. Then we have textual comparison. Having multiple sources allows us to compare variants and determine the most likely original text. This is called collation. Historical corroboration. External sources such as non-Christian writings, archaeological findings, contemporary historical records can all corroborate the accounts found in the primary documents like the New Testament. This external evidence supports the historical credibility of the text. And then, understanding transmission history is key. Multiple sources reveal the history of a document's transmission. By examining the geographical spread and chronological distribution of manuscripts, scholars can trace how texts were copied and circulated. Then it gives us insight into cultural and linguistic contexts. Different sources often reflect cultural and linguistic contexts in which they were produced. This information helps in understanding how contemporary readers and scribes would have interpreted the text, providing deeper insights into their meaning and significance. And I like this one because it shows us that the four gospel writers had different audiences in mind when they penned their gospels. Matthew presents Jesus as the King of the Jews. Mark presents Jesus as the faithful servant. Luke presents Christ as the Son of Man, and John presents Christ as the Son of God. Even more so, the gospel authors use different language. John's focus on Christ as the divine Logos is unique to his writings. Matthew uses the phrase kingdom of heaven, where the other gospel writers use kingdom of God. John spells the same word multiple ways in one chapter, while Luke, the physician, requires a greater vocabulary to understand his Greek gospel. Then it also plays into mitigation of bias. Relying on a single source can introduce bias, as each source can reflect the particular views and agendas of its author. This is important for understanding the context of conversations and events, so we don't misinterpret or misapply the text. Then there's the validation of eyewitness accounts. Multiple independent sources can validate eyewitness accounts. For example, the existence of different gospel accounts that narrate similar events from Jesus' life suggests that these events were widely recognized and transmitted in early Christian communities. Number 4, the criterion of dissimilarity. I'm going to lose points here for using a nerdy phrase, but I love history and this one's important. The criterion of dissimilarity is a tool used in historical research to help determine the authenticity of certain sayings and actions attributed to Jesus in the Gospels. It means if a saying or an action is attributed to Jesus, if that is different from the prevailing Jewish tradition of his time, and also even distinct from early Christian churches' teachings, then it's likely to be authentic. That means that the sayings of Jesus are less likely to have been invented by Jesus' contemporaries or early Christians. The fact that Jesus' words are distinct from Judaism and also distinct from the early church attests to their authenticity. Jesus' Sermon on the Mount and his self-identification as the Son of Man are good examples of his teachings that were different from Judaism in his day. Further, the fact that Jesus nowhere taught his disciples to keep the Lord's Day as a day of worship further demonstrates that the early church did not fabricate his words to affirm their theology. Number 5, historical context. We're running long, so I'll try to keep the rest short. Unlike pseudepigraphal books and other writings, we see accuracy and authenticity in the New Testament. The New Testament authors convey messages in a manner that is consistent with the audience of their day. Their language, their idioms, were that of the era in which they wrote. Additionally, the lack of anachronisms in the New Testament demonstrate that the Gospels and other books were not later forgeries. Further, the insight to cultural practices in everyday life testifies to the authenticity of the New Testament, including the Gospels, and thereby the words of Jesus. The political conditions of the New Testament are consistent with that of Judea and the rest of the Roman Empire in the 1st century AD. This is wonderfully demonstrated by the Jewish context of Jesus' teachings in the midst of a Greco-Roman culture that was under the influence and occupation of the Roman Empire. Number 6, early Christian sources. Outside of the synoptic Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and their multiple attestations and early composition, we have the Gospel of John, that was likely written separately than the others and separated from those authors. John's Gospel offers unique content in a unique style. This serves as independent confirmation of the other Gospels. Early church fathers, like Clement of Rome and Ignatius of Antioch and Polycarp, all speak of Jesus' sayings. These individuals were the next generations of believers immediately after the apostles. Clement is most likely mentioned in the New Testament, and the other two were students of John. The Didache, an early Christian manual, includes our earliest instructions for the ordinances of the Lord's Supper and baptism, consistent with Jesus' words in the Gospels. Number 7, non-Christian sources. Josephus and Tacitus are excellent examples of non-Christian sources that attest the historical Jesus of Nazareth. Josephus lived from 37 to 100 AD and was a contemporary to the apostles and the New Testament authors. In his Jewish Antiquities, he describes Jesus as a wise teacher who performed surprising deeds and was crucified by Pontius Pilate. While there's some argument of the passage's authenticity, most scholars agree that Josephus wrote about Jesus. Also, James, the brother of Jesus, was mentioned in Antiquities 20. Josephus refers to the stoning of James, the brother of Jesus, who's called the Christ. And then Tacitus' Annals mention the execution of Christus by Pontius Pilate during the reign of Emperor Tiberius. Tacitus describes the spread of Christianity. And beyond these two, we have Suetonius, who in his Lives of the Caesars describes one Chrestus, which may or may not have referred to Christ or his followers. And then there's Pliny the Younger, who describes his dealings with Christians in Bithynia who worship Christ as a god and sang hymns to him. There are also Talmudic references that refer to Yeshu negatively. And all of these non-Christian sources provide even more evidence to support the historical Jesus of Nazareth. I know what some of you are thinking. I just gave 7 reasons why we can know that Jesus' words are actually what he said. I could have just answered that, I believe it all by faith, and been done with it. Yes, the just are to live by faith, and we're saved by faith. But we're not saved by blind faith, and neither do we live by blind faith. There is an abundance of tangible, credible, historical, textual evidence to give us every reason to believe that the words of Jesus in the Gospels and in the New Testament are the authentic words of the real historical Jesus of Nazareth who lived in the 1st century in Judea. Now, what are we to do with the words of Jesus? Well, quite simply, we are to trust and obey.